Hello friends, my name is Bintou and welcome back to the channel for today's video, which is my March reading wrap up. Now, I had such a weird reading month for March because what happened was I read about 10 books this month, but the first 7 books I read in like the first 7 days of the month. And then I was out of town for 2 weeks and got almost no reading done. Despite all of that, I think I read a good number of really good books this month. The first part of this video actually is going to be talking about those first 7 books that I read at the start of the month. I had filmed footage that was going to be a recent reads video that I never got around to editing and uploading. So we're going to cue that footage now and get into the first 7 books I read this month. All right, so the first book on this list is Later by Stephen King. This is a brand new release. It came out on the 2nd of March, I believe, and I picked it up on that day along with the audiobook and read it basically in one day actually. And I really enjoyed this one. I would say if I had to give it a star rating, I would say a 4-star read. But this is a horror story and it's basically told from the perspective of this little boy, both as a young kid and also as an adult. He's describing the details of his life and his childhood affliction, which basically is that he can see dead people. Immediately after they have died, he can see like their spirits outside of their bodies and he can ask them things, he can talk to them. Whatever he asks them, they have to respond truthfully. Of course, he's super young and no one really believes him. He's only told his mom and his mom doesn't believe him, but eventually starts to believe him because of him knowing things that he would have basically no way of possibly knowing. He does get taken advantage of a little bit throughout the book by his mom and his mom's girlfriend. And eventually the main storyline becomes that there is this ghost that haunts him because of him asking the ghost something that it really didn't want to admit to, but it had to nonetheless because they have to tell him the truth. I would say the suspense factor on this was pretty good, and I think that's why I was able to get through it in one sitting because I really wanted to know how things ended up with the haunting. I also like the point of view that was set up with this particular book, where it was told by the young man as an adult looking back on his childhood and kind of explaining the events as they were unfolding. I liked this narrative style and I think it fit the story well. Overall, again, I really enjoyed this. So if you're thinking about picking up Later by Stephen King, I would recommend it. Then I read Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. So this was my first ever Frederick Bachman book. And I've been seeing anxious people everywhere, like everywhere over BookTube. And then whenever I am like browsing a bookstore, I also see posters for it everywhere. So I guess I had never really looked at it. I only seen the cover and I was wondering what the big deal is with this book. And I finally picked it up because the audiobook became available from my library. So I thought, why not? And I am so glad that I did. This ended up being a 5-star read for me. And Anxious People is unlike any book that I've read and I really enjoyed it. It is a very funny commentary on basically how hard it is to be an adult, told through the story of this bank robbery gone so terribly wrong that turned into this hostage situation. And I think that's why just looking at the blurb, it's like, how does this turn into a story? And you just gotta read the story, basically. The audiobook for this was fantastic. I'm so glad that I got the audiobook to go along with the ebook. And I think my favorite thing about this book, again, is just how well the author was able to depict the struggles of all of these different people. So there's like the policeman, there's the bank robber, there are the hostages, there are some bank tellers as well. How their stories can kind of come together at the end, but also how he was able to give us an idea or a sense of their struggles with all these typical adult things that everyone struggles with. And he was able to do it and infuse it with comedy and in this super atypical situation that all these people found themselves in. I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely gonna pick up more Bachman in the future. I'll probably pick up Beartown next because that seems to be the book that everyone seems to recommend by him. So that was a horror and a contemporary fiction. Next, I read 2 romances, both by the same author. So I read The Right Swipe and Girl Gone Viral by Alicia Rai. And these are both part of the Modern Love series. And I think there's a 3rd book as well that I am currently on hold for and probably will get to within the next 4 weeks or so. And these were both 4-star reads. And I haven't given a romance 4 stars in a long time. So I really enjoyed both of these books. So the first book, The Right Swipe, focuses on this girl, Rhiannon, and she basically is the creator of this app where people are swiping on each other. So it's basically a Tinder in this fictional world for the most part. And she's got a competitor, which is more like, I think, Match.com, where they have to fill out these long profiles instead. And so they're competing because they are kind of serving different audiences. She wants to take over the company, and the company is now being represented by, or the the face of the company is this former football player that she had a one-night stand with on her app. The romance develops as you would probably expect, where there's a misunderstanding, and so he has to try to get over it, and she's got a lot of like trust issues, and so it takes a while for her to trust him and open up to him. I really liked the addition of there's like a storyline focus on CTE with the football players in this book, and I always love when romance authors bring in some sort of real life element to the book, and it's not just like two people getting together, breaking apart, and then coming back together within the last like 10 pages of the book, which did happen here, but it wasn't the only thing that happened here. And then the second book in this series, Girl Gone Viral, focuses on Kat, and what happens is she goes viral in this like I think it was like a Twitter post that someone made of her having coffee with this stranger. Nothing came of it, but basically they turned it into this huge deal. But she extremely values her privacy. She has extreme anxiety and gets panic attacks, and that's kind of the additional element in this story Alicia Rai adds in. As she's struggling with her panic disorder, she has a bodyguard that's basically watching out for her, and he takes her away from their home in Los Angeles so that they can wait for things to die down. She's always liked her bodyguard, and he likes her too, but they didn't know that, and eventually they come together, and that's the romance storyline here. The male character, Jasvinder, he is Sikh, and what happens is there's also a storyline that delves into some of the history of the Sikh community in California that I thought was really interesting. And actually at the end of the book, she then talks about the immigration laws that prevented Asians from coming into the United States for a while. And there was this Sikh Mexican community that was built as a result of that because they couldn't marry anyone else. It was really fascinating. I definitely learned something, so really enjoyed that. Overall, Alicia Rai, this was my first time reading her books. I have enjoyed them very much, and I'm definitely going to pick up the next book in the series and probably some more for other books if I'm in the mood for that. All right, so that was a horror, contemporary fiction, 2 romances. Let's go to historical fiction next. So I read The Yellow Wife this month, and The Yellow Wife was a absolute 5-star read. This was amazing. This is another book that I read basically in one sitting. I had a lot of long afternoons this week for whatever reason, but this book follows a young woman. Her name is Phoebe, and she was born on a plantation. Her mother is Black, and her mother was a slave, and her father is the plantation owner, so he is this white man. So she's got a little bit special status there. Her mom has promised her that her dad will grant her freedom on her 18th birthday. So she is not destined to basically remain a slave. However, some events happen and her father's not able to keep her promise, and her father's wife, the kind of woman of the plantation, eventually sells her off, and she lands at this jail for slaves, and this jail is brutal. So it's described as having some of the most terrible smells, and the jailer, like the main jailer, he is one of the cruelest jailers around. So he is constantly whipping slaves, overall probably taking things further than he should compared to like some of the other slave owners and jailers. What I really loved about this book is the characters. Phoebe is the main character, but you also end up seeing like her son and her children, as well as some of the other slaves that she works closely with. And there's also a small love interest involved as well. The complicated or complex relationships amongst all of these characters. And she was also put in a really interesting spot where one of her children is a slave and the other one's kind of pass for white. How she's trying to instill in her son that he is a slave in name only, but not in mind, which is what her mom told her. Whereas the rest of the world is letting him know that he's a slave. There's a lot of separation between families here. Overall, just a very moving story. And also, I think it was very well written. It actually also was inspired by an actual woman in jailer that existed in real life, which she talks about at the end of the book if you read the author's interview. And the last 2 books that I read are fiction and a mystery thriller. So the fiction is The Secret Lives of Baba Segis' Wives. This was a very interesting book that follows these 4 wives of this man. His name is Baba Segi, and it's set in Nigeria. And what happens is this woman that is becoming the 4th wife, it begins centered on her story. She decides to marry this man that already has 3 wives, and her family is very disappointed because she is very educated, so she has a university degree. So as she's entering this household where her husband and then the other 3 wives are uneducated and illiterate, they all have this perception that she is extremely snooty no matter what she tries because she is educated and has a degree. She actually has her own reasons for entering into this marriage that you eventually learn about throughout the book. But the problem is that she can't conceive. Her husband thinks that she is barren. They're trying to sort that out. And as they're sorting that out, there is these secrets that are revealed within this family. This book is not very kind to the husband, Baba Segi. He's described in some of the most deplorable ways. It's kind of funny, so definitely if you read it, there's like that comical aspect to it. What I really liked about this is like you get to hear all four of the women's stories and how each of them came to end up in this marriage. What's super interesting is if you get to the very end, there is an author's interview as well. And the author herself actually doesn't think very highly of polygamy, but you don't see that throughout the book. So I think she did a very good job of being able to tell the stories of these women without interjecting any connotations onto it. Like you don't feel that she thinks very negatively or positively about it while you're reading the book. You are just reading their stories and reading how and why they came to end up in this marriage to this man. Overall, this one was a 4-star read for me. And the last book I'll talk about is The Crucifix Killer. Most of the books in this list so far have been 4 or 5 stars, so really excellent. But we're gonna end it on a 2-star for The Crucifix Killer because this book was a little bit disappointing. Now, this book is part of the Robert Hunter series, which is a series that I picked up a couple months ago. I've read 2 books in this series so far, book 5 and 6, I believe. And this particular book is book 1 in the series. I wanted to go back and try some of the earlier books. That was a mistake. It seems like this author definitely got better as he went along because while I loved book 5 and 6, book 1 was not great. To his credit, the overall suspense factor was still there from the get-go. So I did feel the suspense as I was reading this book, but the dialogue in this book was atrocious. It definitely is not like this in the later books because I did not feel that way in the later book. It felt very cliche, like he was using things that he thinks that cops would say. He also added racial slurs in here between some of the black characters, which I think is totally unnecessary, and overall made this not as enjoyable to read as the later books in the series. So this is going to be a series that I wouldn't even recommend that you start with the first book. And the good thing is they all work as standalone, so you can start with some of the later books where the writing drastically improved. I can't say where that turn happens because I haven't read like the second or third books yet, but definitely by the time you get to book 5 and 6, things are much better. All right, now on to the remainder of the books that I read this month. The next book I read was The Fisherman, and I finished this entire book on a single plane ride. It was about, I think it took me about 4 hours to read. Overall, I think that this was a very interesting story. So it's called The Fisherman because it follows these 4 brothers who live in Nigeria. Their father went off to work in another town, so he had to leave the home. And so it's just these boys and their mom. And they decide to become fishermen. So they go down to this river that the whole village thinks it's cursed. And they start getting fish there and selling the fish as well. But then one day while they're down there, there's this guy who he's kind of like homeless and roams around. But he has these powers of premonition, and so everyone believes that whatever he says will come true, and that seems to be the case. And so he gives this prophecy about one of the brothers that causes him to just like completely change and become a whole different person who is like extremely disagreeable and violent and just hated toward his family. And so now this whole family is forced to deal with this. Again, it was a very interesting story. I would say for me, I think this was about a 4-star read, and it was definitely a great way to pass the time on a cross-country flight. I also read Josh and Hazel's Guide to Dating by Christina Lauren. Oh wait, it's their guide to not dating. That's what it is. And I read this because I was watching some other YouTubers video on like they were ranking Christina Lauren's book, and they really enjoyed this book. They ranked it very highly, and I hadn't gotten around to it, so I decided I would. I have to say that this was not one of my favorite Christina Lauren books. I think this is more of like a 3-star read for me. I don't know if, again, it was partly because I was just not really in the mood, but I didn't love Hazel's character. And she is meant to be this super quirky character, but to be honest, I feel like the writing made her come across as more annoying than quirky. But yeah, Josh and Hazel are friends, so this is like a friends to lovers book. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And they're setting each other up on dates with other people that they know, but they're trying to convince themselves that they are just friends, but eventually they will actually come together, as is your typical friends to lovers romance. Again, one of my least favorite Christina Lauren books, actually, if I really think about it. I did not enjoy this book very much at all. And lastly, the book that I'm currently reading is A Deadly Inside Scoop. Now here's the thing, I picked this up and for whatever reason, I couldn't even tell you, I thought that this was going to be a romance, but it's not. I think I thought that because the cover is pink and it's got ice cream on it, but also I think the sprinkles are meant to be a skull. So this is actually supposed to be like a mystery book of some sort. And so once I got over the fact that it wasn't a romance, which you kind of discover within the first couple of chapters because there isn't a romance storyline, I'm actually enjoying enjoying it. So I'm not done with it yet. I'm about 60% of the way through this book. It isn't like a typical mystery thriller that I read, because I wouldn't say that this is extremely suspenseful. It's more like a fiction with a murder element to it. And I don't read these kinds of books very often, but I am liking this author's writing. And so I'm getting to know the characters more, and I'm liking that too. So the main character, her name is Win. She just opened up this ice cream shop. It's like her family's ice cream shop that her grandmother had started, and now she's come to take it over. And so she's worried because she's opening this up in the middle of like a snowstorm, and it's winter, and so she wants people to obviously come in and buy ice cream, but people don't buy ice cream in snowstorms. Eventually, as she's leaving work one day, she stumbles across this dead body, and an investigation starts, and some of the people in her family are the people that are under suspicion for having murdered this guy. Again, a very different take on mystery thriller than I'm used to reading, but I am enjoying that, and I think that this is going to be a 3.5 star read for me. There isn't a whole lot of suspense. Like, I would not say this is a suspenseful book at all, but a nice easy read for people that maybe are newer to mysteries. And those are all of the books that I read for the month of March. There are 2 books that I started and did not finish. First book was called Bluebird, and I picked this up because I was looking for more like crime thrillers or mystery thrillers by African American authors, and Attica Locke is a very popular one, so I thought I would try her work. I really could not finish this book. For me, it was extremely boring. I feel like this book just lacked suspense in a major way. And I know that I really am enjoying A Deadly Inside Scoop, which also isn't super suspenseful, but I think that the writing is more interesting in that book, so that it keeps you going even though there isn't a suspense factor. This book was kind of just like going through event after event after event, and then bringing characters that were getting confusing. And overall, I was not enjoying it. I was kind of forcing myself through it, and once I hit the halfway mark, I just gave up. And the other book that I have not finished is Mistborn. I don't know if I'm going to officially fully DNF this book. I am, I think, about a quarter, probably more than a quarter of the way through this book. But I'm just not as into the story as I was when I started the Stormlight Archive, and I'm really forcing myself through. And truth be told, even if I force myself through this book, I don't think I'm gonna pick up the next 2 because I just didn't enjoy this one as much. I feel like his writing style, Sanderson's writing style, must have matured a little bit more by the time he got to Stormlight Archive, because I really like his writing in that book. But in this book, it just feels very stilted, and he's kind of describing the way that he describes the magic, and he kind of does this in Stormlight as well. It's just like him being very detailed in his description, and it kind of takes you out of the story, except it happens a lot in Mistborn. I do like the characters, and so that's why I would kind of want to finish it, and I also really want to know what happens. But in the end, I may just watch spoilers to figure out what happens without punishing myself through the whole book, since I'm not really enjoying it that much. And that, friends, is my March wrap up, all of the books that I read this month in March. If you liked the video, definitely remember to drop a like. I always forget to say that. And share below in the comments some of the books that you've enjoyed reading this month. And also, what are you looking forward to reading in April? I've got a solid list of a couple books that I really want to get to. Some that I was supposed to get to this month and just didn't, particularly a couple series. And I have a bunch of Kindle Unlimited books that I want to read as well next month. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.